Hello, everyone, and welcome to eDiscovery's webinar, eDiscovery and Forensics in the Cloud. I'm Will Riss with eDiscovery, and thank you for joining us for this 60-minute presentation. Now to introduce our presenter, Chad Gough. Chad is the owner and founder of eDiscovery, a B2B digital forensics firm headquartered in Chicago. Chad has 2 decades of experience successfully providing organizations and attorneys with digital forensics, information security, and electronic discovery services. He is a renowned expert in digital forensics and has been retained as an expert in over 200 cases globally, leading to numerous convictions and settlements. He is a sought-out industry leader to present at digital forensics conferences and has spoken at multiple national conferences. CNN has featured his work and expertise, and he has served as a technical consultant on the CBS television drama CSI Cyber. In his free time, Chad is an adjunct professor at DePaul University, where he teaches computer security and forensics investigations. Chad, we'll hand it off to you.
Hi, Will. Thanks for the intro and welcome everybody to the presentation. We're going to cover today basically what the cloud is, how to preserve a lot of the data that's in the cloud, how to go through and analyze it, filter it, search it, and produce it. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Zoom chat box, and we'll cover those at the end of the presentation. We'll keep the questions anonymous and the responses we'll go over at the end of the presentation. So thanks, and to get started, what is the cloud? So we're just going to cover the cloud and kind of what it is. And really, it's just somebody else's computer. So there used to be a point in time when if a business or an organization wanted access to a specific application or type of data, they had to go out and buy servers and figure out how big the servers needed to be and install the software and purchase it and basically run everything themselves. The cloud is now really just a software as a service. So instead of buying all the software and the hardware, you basically pay a subscription fee, and you don't necessarily have to worry about updating the software, keeping maintenance contracts, backing it up to make sure that it's available in the event something happens, how to scale it if you go from 100 users to 100,000 users. All that's basically taken care of you by that cloud provider. You get better availability. You don't have to worry about what happens if your internet connection goes down. And it allows users to access the data from literally almost anywhere, which can be a pro or a con depending on the type of data you have in there. Because users are allowed to log in anywhere, it can make data theft very easy. You don't have to sit inside of a company building to be able to access email anymore. You can get it from your iPad, you can get it from a personal computer, and you can get access to documents and data that were normally protected in some way. There's a lot of logging that can be limited with cloud providers as well, and we'll talk about that. So, when you used to host the software internally, you had access to all of the raw logs. You can keep them or retain them for as long as you want. With cloud providers, that's not necessarily always the case. And obviously, this data is discoverable, and all the typical rules of evidence apply. Lots of examples of cloud services are out there now. These are just some of the ones we've had to deal with so far this year. QuickBooks Online, G Suite. You don't have your QuickBooks file local anymore. It's all stored online. So getting access to some of that data and producing it can be a little bit of a challenge. A lot of companies will do cloud on cloud as well. So for example, if you have Office 365 or G Suite for your email, maybe you think that platform doesn't offer you enough protection. So you can put things like Mimecast or FireEye or something else in front of it that will do some advanced logging, auditing, and actual preservation of that as well. So you can use that to sort of archive and store a lot of information. Cloud data is obviously important. I think pretty much every business in some way or another has some data that's stored in the cloud. Especially during COVID, a lot of users are accelerating their use of the cloud. A lot of businesses are moving more and more of their information to the cloud. A lot of the data that's stored in the cloud can provide you some unique information, access points as far as when users were logging in, IP addresses from where they're logging in from, general activity usage. A lot of that information is just readily available where you didn't have that before. So how is this all different? So first of all, documents have changed. We're used to, when you think of a document, we're used to a Word document that's stored on your computer. A lot of cloud documents, Google Docs, for example, Evernote, Quip is an interesting one I had to deal with recently, where it's basically a chat-based application where it's messaging on top of a document, and they don't really differentiate the difference between a document and a spreadsheet. They're all just sort of files to them. A lot of these documents will need to be converted in some way before they can actually use them. Remember, a Google document is really just a document or a word processing file that's open when it's in your browser. To get it out of there, you need to download it. And you can download it as Word or PDF or a variety of other file formats. But that's how you're going to actually copy it or make it useful. And a lot of these applications have features that are basically just native to the cloud. So there's certain things you can just do in that cloud environment with that document that you won't be able to do once you've converted it to another format. And that may have some impact on whether or not that type of information is relevant to your case. Documents in the cloud have versions and revision history and sharing capabilities that we're not used to with a typical Word document that's stored on our computer. You know, we're used to certain things in a Word document: created dates, modified dates, authors, last printed. When you're dealing with a cloud document, you might say, who's the author of that document? And it would be at what point in time, because multiple people can go in there and revise it and edit it. And all the metadata is different. So Google Docs, for example, may have when something was created. Other cloud service providers may have uploaded as a type of created date. You might get modified as opposed to last saved. And sometimes that's all you'll get, just a last modified date or time. You won't get created. Certain sites will have when things were actually opened up and by who. So you'll get that access type information, which is a little different than a last access date from a file that's stored on a computer. And these documents can have really unlimited versions and authors and contributors. So when you have a Word document on your computer, you've got that current version. With something like a cloud document, you can rewind and you can go back and look at all the different types and version histories that may exist. And you can sometimes get, 100 different versions of a document from when it was actually first created to the current version that it's in. So if you're doing a discovery request on this, do you want the current version, or do you want versions as of specific dates or times in case you think they may have been changed? Storage has changed as well. We used to think of, just preserving a computer, and that would get access to all of the data. USB drives, maybe, right? If they stored something on external storage. USB drives and external storage like that are kind of going the way of the floppy disk, where they're just kind of becoming obsolete. More and more people are storing things in the cloud, whether it be personal or business related cloud storage providers. And these are merging. So with various cloud applications, all of the data, like let's say you preserved a computer, all of the data that that person had access to might not be on that computer anymore. So both Box, Dropbox, Microsoft OneDrive, which is default in Windows now, and iCloud, which is on all Macs, all have the ability to store documents and data in the cloud. And it will do it automatically, where if I haven't accessed files in a while and they're not recent, it may offload those from my computer and store those up in the cloud. Additionally, there may be a ton of files that I have in the cloud where it will only download them or sync them to my computer on demand. So, if I go to my Dropbox account, I may see 1,000 files there, but until I double click on something, it's actually going to download that file in real time and then open it up. And there are versions, there are features that will allow you to make this content available offline. For example, if you're on an airplane, you want to make a folder or directory available offline, it will actually download and sync that in real time. But because these are merging, oftentimes we find when there is cloud storage and we get the computer, we image the computer, preserve it, and take a look at it, that not all of the data or documents are there. We'll basically just see little tiny files that are kind of like stubs for the actual documents. So you might need to sync this stuff locally first, or actually go out and also preserve the cloud account. It's changed forensics as well. So if you've ever dealt with computer forensics and looked at when people were accessing documents and which documents were actually accessing and opening, you might be familiar with things like MRUs, or most recently used, jump lists, link files, all that stuff that shows activity to specific documents. Well, if we're in the cloud, you may be using a different type of application, or you may be accessing these files in a browser. And it's not going to leave that kind of forensic trail of you double-clicking and opening a document with Word versus accessing a Google document. Different types of artifacts. So oftentimes, well, actually, the best place to get this information is from the cloud provider itself. And there's great activity logs depending on the provider. You know, when you've added files, when things were uploaded, when things were changed, version histories between when files were opened and who was opening them, different dates and times. You can also look at deleted files for a period of time, or actually rewind the entire cloud storage account to a specific date and time. Lots of different types of activity that are in the cloud that would show access and usage of documents that you wouldn't typically find on a computer. And you can still do forensics on the computer and look at browser history. So all modern browsers will store some history or browsing activity on your computer. Things like Google Chrome and the newest version of Internet Explorer, which they're calling Edge or something new, will actually have a way to sign into the browser, and your browsing history will actually sync up with Google. So if I don't have access to your computer, but I do have access to a Google account and you were using this, I can look at the browsing history across all of your different devices straight from Google. And all of this cache data can be analyzed, and you can use this to figure out whether or not people have been accessing cloud storage accounts, viewing documents from them, or potentially uploading documents to them. Most of these browsers will also have a private browsing mode. A lot of that will prevent browsing history from being either retained or written to disk. In that case, you may get some of it, but oftentimes, you know, if you find a user that's using private browsing, you may want to question them as to why they were doing it or what sites they were accessing on private browsing, because not all that history would be available. Mobile data goes to the cloud quite a bit as well now. All these modern operating systems that we use, Apple iOS and Android devices, all will sync or back up to the cloud. So things like call logs, SMS chat messages, your internet history, call logs, calendar, contacts, all that information you may be looking for from a mobile device, you might actually not need the mobile device at all. Especially during times like this with COVID, we have a lot of mobile device collections and information we need to retrieve from mobile phones for discovery purposes. We don't actually need to get access to the phone depending on what type of information they're looking for. We can get access to the Google account, your Samsung Cloud account, or your iCloud account, depending on what type of phone you have. And we can actually pull a lot of this information down straight from the cloud as a way to preserve it, as opposed to getting access to the phones themselves. Also a great way to get data if someone conveniently loses or drops or destroys their phone in some way. Just because the phone's not available doesn't mean we still can't get access to the data. So how do we go about preserving this data? First thing you need to do before you start requesting and preserving cloud data is come up with a plan. Why do you need it? What are you really looking for, and what are you trying to prove? Is it just getting access to the documents that are currently in there to see what they are, or is the history of these type of documents relevant as well? When they were created, whether or not they were opened and viewed. What are you really looking to prove? Is it just a simple discovery request where you just search it, produce it, and find out what's there, or is there really activity that you're trying to look for? And depending on where they where the documents are stored, what type of service they may be using, you're going to have to figure out what kind of collection methods are available, what kind of date fields are available, how are we going to go about collecting this, what kind of metadata you're going to be dealing with, and whether or not you actually need a subpoena to do this. We're going to walk through a lot of this coming up. But still, oftentimes we'll see with the collection of something like a Google account, and they'll ask it to be produced in a standard load file. And the load file will include all of the typical metadata fields that you would see in an Office document. Well, it's a Google account. We have different types of metadata fields. So do you want all the metadata fields that are available from Google? You want us to map them? Or are you really only interested in some of these? So having a good understanding of what kind of information is there and what you're looking for can really impact how we actually go about collecting this data and analyzing it. As part of this plan, you can send out litigation holds and preservation requests on cloud data, just like you would a mobile device or a computer. You can send discovery requests and subpoenas as well. If you're going to be doing this, make sure you have some good definitions and a good reason and a good story for why you actually want this data and why it's available. And make sure you're specific in what you're asking for, right? Do you want the current version of a Google Doc in a Word format, a PDF? Are you concerned about comments? Some of that may come down in one version versus not another. Downloading a Google Doc as a Word file will retain all the comments that you might have on a Google document, but downloading it as a PDF won't. So there'll be different information in different file types depending on how you're actually downloading and producing that data. If you have questions, obviously, reach out and ask somebody, because there are things that aren't technically feasible. And just think about your cloud collection and preservation as part of a more holistic plan. If you're going to issue a litigation hold, you can do this just like any other type of ESI, but you need to be specific. A lot of the data that's stored in the cloud, especially things like audit logs and activity records, they don't stay around forever. The chart on the right is an example of how long Google will keep various audit logs, and it's really only 6 months, 30 days for some of it. So once that 6-month time period is passed, they're just simply not available. You could subpoena Google, you could ask, you can try whatever you want, but they're just not available. That goes for Office 365 data as well. I mean, typically it's 90 days for Office 365 audit log information. A lot of this can depend on your plan and what service level you have, but once it's gone, it's basically impossible to recover. So if you need this type of information, do the research, figure out how long it's actually stored, and make sure you get that litigation hold in place. As far as collecting the data, the first and easiest way is to simply export it. Many of these profiles, many of these platforms that are online have a profile download or some sort of export or takeout feature. They're very, very similar, especially things like Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Twitter. The profile download features that are available on these social media sites look very, very similar to what a law enforcement subpoena would look like. I think over time, Facebook just got tired of responding to so many law enforcement requests, and they took their law enforcement tool and made it an export feature. So there's a way in Facebook, for example, to request your entire Facebook profile, all your activity, your logons, and all that information will come down. So you do need the ability to actually log into the account and perform that request, and it usually might send it to an email address. So you might need access to an email as well as the credentials to log on to a social media account. But that's usually the best way to go through and actually get some of this data. But again, it's going to depend, because some of that data might not have different types of metadata fields that are in there. Google has Takeout, which works for Gmail collections, all of your Google Drive data. You can specify how you want it to be converted. So there are a lot of good options built in within a lot of these cloud service providers to basically just give you access to the data. Some of it may not be readily available or usable. So Google, for example, will produce your email in something called an mbox format. It's kind of standard, but a lot of people won't have the tools to be able to open up or read an inbox. But you can easily convert that to something like an email message or a PST file. Slack, as a good example, produces output in something called JSON, which I'll cover in a little bit, but that might take some additional work to make it actually usable and readable for you to deal with. Talked about a lot of this, but some of this access may depend on your subscription levels as well. So Slack is a good example of that. Unless you're on like an enterprise grid plan in Slack, you don't have the ability to actually export all of the messages. Certain service plans will have different export capabilities available to them. Office 365 has a great eDiscovery feature where you can place litigation holds on certain people. You can manage that. You can do eDiscovery searches in there, and you can export to a variety of different formats. But that only comes with different types of Office 365 licenses. So rather than being on your own physical media in servers that you control in a data center inside your company or your organization, this is being stored on hardware that's owned by a service provider. So you don't have access to that raw hardware to perform a data collection. I have been asked many times in the past to make a forensic image of an Exchange server for Office 365. It's just not something that you can do. You don't get that low-level access like you would if it was stored on your premises. So just keep a lot of that in mind. Another good way to access this data is through something called an API, or an application programming interface. This is really a way that you or a piece of software or a client can communicate to a cloud service provider and exchange information. It's usually in some sort of programming language. Sometimes the language doesn't matter, but there are different methods that you can use. Dropbox has a very easy one. Dropbox lists files, recursive in the photos directory, and include deleted items. So I can get a listing back of all of the Dropbox photos that were on your Dropbox account which is really a couple lines of code. And I can include deleted or not include deleted. So there's a lot of information out there that you can get access to. And sometimes when it returns that information, you will see certain metadata that you may not even see in the web user interface, because that's kind of like the user interface that Dropbox has made for you to access your files, but the underlying storage may have more or less data that's available to you. A good example of this is, Dropbox allows you to make comments on files. So if you've shared a set of files out with somebody else, they can make comments on those files. Those comments aren't necessarily available through Dropbox's API. So if comments on files are something that you're interested in, that just may not be available in the API. A lot of these APIs are documented, some of them aren't. Some of them require additional research. iCloud's notorious for this. There's not a lot of documentation out there to access iCloud data and storage. So some custom programming may need to be done depending on what kind of information you're actually looking for or want to get out of that cloud storage. As a last resort, you can always crawl and capture. So if the API doesn't have access to what you want, or there's no good way to get that information out, you can always crawl and capture that web page or use that application and make some screenshots. Most of the web pages that exist on the internet today aren't static content. So for example, there might be a video embedded on a web page. Do I want to capture that video? If I do, I might have to click to actually get it to play. Sometimes you want to capture various banners or rotating content or ads that may appear on a site. Those might not be available to you, or you may have to refresh a couple times to make sure you get the ad that you're looking for. And sometimes it's based on previous browsing history. Facebook comments are a popular one, where a lot of sites will have a post or a page up, and then they'll allow users to comment on the post, but they're actually using Facebook comments. So it's linked to a Facebook account. Those can be a little difficult to capture. Because they actually require some user input. You have to click around on the page and get it to appear the way you want and scroll through content. If you've been on Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, you'll know that a lot of these pages have something called a limited scroll. So scrolling to the bottom of the pages never really happens. The further you scroll down, the more content it will actually load. Sometimes you actually have to hit a spacebar or a key to get it to load more content. So if you're going to crawl and capture, you can kind of think about a lot of these different types of interactivity that may exist on a web page and how you're going to capture it. But you can always capture them to a PDF or an image style format, include some metadata embedded in the PDF or the image about when it was captured, how it was captured, and you can hash that information to provide some authentication to it. So as a last resort, and sometimes it's the only way, is to actually just go out there and kind of crawl and capture these web pages manually on the cloud. Deleted data. So we're obviously not gods, and we don't control these servers. They're in the cloud. We're basically just using the application that's available to us. So if we have a computer, you know, we have things like deleted files, we have slack space, we have an unallocated and free space. We can use that to go and find deleted content. Once it's gone from a cloud provider, it may be gone forever. You know, there's no sort of 1-800 number you can call and speak to someone at Google or Facebook to help you recover the data. They may not give you all the data they have available, and you may be at the mercy of that cloud storage provider. But there are ways to get some information even after it has been deleted. G Suite, basically the Gmail for business users, you know, even after you've deleted your email, put it in your trash and emptied your trash and it's not available, you know, within 25 days or so, you can actually go through and recover and restore a lot of that deleted information. It's true for Office 365 too. There's a purges folder that exists that will have deleted data for a period of time. So it's usually a small window. You know, even things that you've deleted from iCloud, you know, there's a window of time where some deleted data can be recovered, but once it's gone, it's usually permanently gone, and there's nothing you can do to get that back. Some collection gotchas. So obviously you don't control everything. Logs and other data may not be available to you. You're also probably going to run into some rate limiting or throttling problems. Zendesk, which is like a ticketing system that's stored in the cloud, is notorious for this. You know, you can utilize their API, but you're going to be limited to a certain number of requests. If you're downloading data from Gmail, for example, you may only get a certain amount of messages per day. So it may just take some additional time. We get the request a lot saying, why is it taking so long to download this Gmail account? It's not that our internet connection sucks. It's that, you know, Google is really just throttling this type of information. So it may take a while to actually collect this, and it's going to be out of our hands and out of your hands. You do need to have proper access to do the collection. So if it's a corporate account, there's usually an administrator. If it's a personal account, user IDs and passwords usually work. And we oftentimes will need the help of some sort of two-factor authentication code, maybe stored on a mobile device. There are applications that are out there that are sort of privacy focused: WhatsApp, Signal, Wicker, a lot of messaging applications. These can be collected. Again, Wicker, when the message gets deleted, or Snapchat, when that video gets deleted, it's probably really gone. There may be a small window, but hours, not days or weeks, where you can retrieve that type of information. But it can be a little bit more difficult. On the legal issues, again, spoliation from the cloud is very, very easy, and it happens a lot. This data just doesn't exist forever. A lot of accounts will get closed due to inactivity. We've had accounts be locked. We had a Facebook account that got locked, and through the process of working with Facebook, they figured out the account was opened up by someone that was under 13, and therefore they weren't allowed to have a Facebook account, and Facebook actually deleted it instead of reopening it. Accounts can be terminated for violating terms of service as well. Some nasty posts out there can get your account suspended or banned, and you may not be able to get access to that data. Service providers change a lot. So if you're going to collect from it, make sure you collect everything and you get all the information you need before the account gets closed or someone loses access to it. Good case study we have is Yahoo Messenger. If anybody remembers Yahoo Messenger. We had a request for Yahoo Messenger a couple of years ago. And as it turns out that on July 17th, 2018, Yahoo basically just closed Yahoo Messenger. It's no longer a service that they offer. So as of July 17th, we weren't able to access any of the Yahoo Messenger data that was stored in the cloud. July 16th wouldn't have been a problem. So between when there was actually a litigation hold and when we've been asked to actually collect or preserve that data, it actually got shut down. And that information just wasn't available, and it did cause an issue for spoliation in the courts. There have been some amendments to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure related to spoliation, and they do apply to the cloud as well. So failure to preserve that information or take reasonable steps to preserve it. Again, remember, audit logs, for example, and activity logs will only stay around for a period of time. So, collecting the documents or just saying, don't change those documents, don't do anything to your cloud account, that might be an okay way to preserve the documents. But if the request actually does contain activity and usage information, then you're going to want to get those audit logs before they disappear. There is a 2018 Cloud Act, and that basically amends the Stored Communications Act. And it says that if you're an internet-based service provider and you're subject to US jurisdiction, even if the data is stored outside of the US, you still need to be able to produce it. And it's really geared toward law enforcement, which doesn't help us a lot, but the Cloud Act will say, look, Microsoft is based in the US, even though they have servers in the EU, they can access it, therefore they should access it and be able to produce it. Getting access to opposing data. The easiest way is to ask nicely. Generate a discovery request, ask for certain information, ask them to do just a takeout of that information. Certain accounts are closed or deleted. Deactivated versus deleted. So Facebook makes it really hard to delete your Facebook account. There's several additional clicks and steps you actually need to do to delete it. Most people read the word deactivate as delete, and they will only go in and deactivate their account. That means at any point in time, you can go back and reactivate that Facebook account and bring it back. Twitter is another example. If you delete your Twitter account and you get access to them within 25 days, they will bring that information back. Instagram is another one that's notoriously hard to actually delete an account. Most of those will go into a deactivated state. Probably seen a news article where Instagram retained deleted user information. That was actually just found using the takeout feature. It was an Instagram user that performed a takeout of their own data and realized the takeout contained information that was actually deleted by them over a year ago. That wasn't a law enforcement subpoena request or anything special. It was just a simple takeout. If someone's deceased and you can't get access to it, there are ways to get access to someone's cloud account even after they've been deceased. They'll often memorialize those accounts or bring those online in some way where the information can be accessed or screenshotted or scraped in some way. And again, you can always ask the service provider. So Twitter's a unique one. By logging on to your Twitter account, you're not able to look at IP addresses for where you've logged on from or other information about your account. But if you were to actually email Twitter, they will provide you with certain information that you don't have access to right now as the owner of the account. So, to say, I want a list of the IP addresses that you've used to access Twitter within the last few months, a custodian may say, well, look, here's my user ID and password. I can't find that information. I don't have it. Certain service providers, you can send them an email and get access to non-public information just by doing a request. It's not something you actually need to send a subpoena for. But if you do need to send a subpoena, the Facebook versus San Francisco is a good one to look at. They refused to produce some Facebook accounts for some murder victims, and they were citing the Stored Communications Act. Well, the California court realized that basically if you have lawful consent, Facebook was required to turn that information over. Even though this is a criminal case, it applies and will help a lot in a civil case because it's lawful consent. So you do need a subpoena that is signed by a judge, and that would be lawful consent. So that's a good statute to keep in mind. But it can be very, very difficult to serve civil subpoenas on cloud providers. One difference between a civil subpoena versus a criminal subpoena is typically a criminal subpoena will include a clause in there that says the provider can't notify the end user, and that's typically not available in a civil subpoena. So if you are going to send a subpoena, the service provider might notify the user that they're actually being subpoenaed. The easiest way to do this is kind of check their terms of service. A lot of cloud service providers will have a law enforcement guide, which will include some email addresses and some phone numbers and fax numbers in there. And they'll typically only respond from a domain name that has a law enforcement address in there. But oftentimes those guides will be a help, or if it comes from a law firm domain, they'll at least provide some information as to how they expect to get subpoenas and sometimes even sample language. So keep the requests limited so they don't kick them back. You will need something to identify the account. It might be a user ID, an email address, or some other unique identifier. So keep that in mind and make sure you can get a hold of that in advance and do research on them. So the little snippet I have is from Google. And they actually do have a page on their support site that talks about how to deal with civil requests from inside the US and outside the US. They tell you where to serve. Typically, they want it through a California court, so it may require you to find somebody in California to help you out with the subpoena, but they do have a way to do this, and other companies do as well. So how are you gonna look at all this data? Again, Office documents and email, we're used to dealing with that. The screenshot is what Slack data looks like when it comes back. That's what a JSON file format looks like. And you need to convert that to something readable, like the screenshot below, that looks good, that you can actually use as an exhibit and you can use to filter on. So make sure that your discovery protocols know what type of data is being returned and how you're going to filter, search it, and produce it. So that's actually in a usable format, especially if you have to do a privilege review or apply any redactions to that data. Again, everything that you're used to from an EDRM standpoint with processing, review, analysis, and production can be done on cloud data. It just needs to be processed and reviewed in a different way, making sure you are exchanging the right metadata fields and the documents in the right format. Looking at that data, understanding what a sample is, and making sure that you're dealing with this in a way that both parties are going to agree to. And if you do need load files, you are exchanging that metadata in a separate file, making sure that those load file fields match up to the type of data that's being requested. So in a nutshell, some takeaways. Everybody has some type of data stored in the cloud somewhere. The data is vastly different than any of the traditional ESI that you're used to looking at from a computer. All of these file formats are different. You're going to have to convert them, put them in some format that's going to make them usable, that you can produce, and review, search, and redact. All of the metadata that you're used to, last accessed, last printed, all of that's different in the cloud, including revision history. So you can ask for documents as they existed at a specific date and time. Service providers. When you're dealing with a cloud service provider, all of the audit logs and what's contained within the audit logs are going to be different from provider to provider. So get them while you can. And a lot of this may be based on a service plan. Some of this stuff may be available if you upgrade your plan. So we've had Slack collections before where they're on a free plan and there's no way to export their data from Slack on a free plan. We can temporarily put them on an enterprise plan, get access to the eDiscovery APIs, perform a preservation, and then next month back them down to another plan. The cloud data doesn't have that free and allocated space that we're used to recovering deleted data and artifacts on. So spoliation can happen easily, especially since that cloud data is constantly being accessed and is constantly syncing. So last modified, for example, there's not often a way to roll back a last modified date on cloud data. So documents are being uploaded, changed, deleted over a period of time. Make sure that you're grabbing that so spoliation doesn't happen. If you're thinking about preserving a computer, you might also ask, do you have any other storage devices, such as USB devices, thumb drives, hard drives? Probably also going to want to ask for whether or not they store information in the cloud. The cloud data and the data on the computer are almost always not an exact match. There's going to be differences. If you're not sure if somebody's using cloud data or any cloud services, looking at their internet or browser history is going to give you clues as to where they've been on the internet, what type of services they may have accessed. Even applications on a mobile device will give you an idea for what type of cloud services or social media accounts someone may be accessing and using. Best case scenario is you're going to be able to preserve using that API or some sort of export functionality that's available from the provider. If you don't have access to that, screen capturing is that last resort. And make sure that all of your discovery protocols are focused and sort of based on reality. Don't ask to image an Office 365 server. Don't ask for backups from cloud service providers from specific dates and times if they're not available. Make sure you research what you're really looking for and make sure your discovery protocols actually match what that provider offers. And I think that would be it. Are there any takeaways or questions?
Perfect. Thanks, Chad. We'll go ahead and answer a couple of the questions that have come in. And just a reminder, questions are anonymous and they can be typed into the Q&A portion of the Zoom window. So a couple clerical ones that came in that easy to answer. Will this video or webinar presentation be available online afterwards? And are we able to download the written content? And the answer to that, to both of those is yes. Tomorrow, anyone who's registered will receive a link to the video for this webinar, as well as a PDF to the presentation document. For any of the ForDiscovery webinars, we like to be able to get these materials in your hands immediately after the webinar so that you can use them for your own knowledge base, any matters you might have in place, or to be able to share with colleagues.